The primary purpose of Uniquely Human, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with each individual or family for specific guidance.
Uniquely Human, the podcast, is produced by Elevated Studio. Music is graciously provided by Matt Savage of Savage Records.
Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Prezant, clinical scholar, researcher, and consultant on autism and neurodiversity, and a Brooklyn boy raised in the big city.
And I'm Dave. I'm none of those things, and I grew up on a farm in Illinois. But being on the spectrum myself, I have plenty of personal insight to lend.
And this is Uniquely Human, the podcast, a show that illuminates and celebrates autism and neurodiversity. Today on Uniquely Human, the podcast, I am very excited to have a couple and a couple of friends who've gotten to know us and we've gotten to know them at our parent retreat over the last couple of years. And that is Damon, Bryan, and Tarah Bryan. So welcome to Uniquely Human, the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. We're glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And one of the things that really intrigued me and led to inviting you on is what you shared with us at our parent retreat weekend. And Damon came a couple of years ago, and then Tarah came last year. It's just the contributions that you make also due to your individual expertise, as well as being parents. We thought would be just something that's wonderful for our listeners to hear. So if you could share a little bit about your professional and personal journey that led you to develop Utah Autism Outdoors and explain what that is.
For me, my first experience with kind of supporting autistic individuals goes way back to college. When I was at Michigan State University. I grew up in Michigan, and I was a camp counselor at a summer camp for 2 summers, and we served individuals with all sorts of disabilities, not just autism, but kind of the first official support and exposure to working with that population. And it was in kind of an outdoor setting. I mean, we did all the typical summer camp stuff, sleeping in cabins and going on the lake and horseback riding and all that kind of stuff. And then, I'm a mental health counselor by training and in my day job. And as I kind of got into my career, going to graduate school and then getting out into the work world, I was drawn to kind of working with teenage clients and to therapeutic settings that really provided these sort of outdoor-based therapy experiences, in addition to more of the traditional talk therapy. And some of these were kind of general mental health settings, but some of them were more autism specific. And I sort of gained this experience working with autistic clients and found I really enjoyed it. And I also found that there was this real dichotomy amongst the clinical staff where some of us were like, yeah, like send me more. I really like working with autistic clients. And some were like, I don't know. I don't feel very effective. I don't know what to, how to help them. And so I just sort of a lot of autistic clients got sort of funneled to me in these different settings I was in. And so then, kind of fast forward 20 years in, so about 3 years ago, I was working in private practice, which is where I'm at now. And I felt like I was kind of finally fairly good at working with autistic clients. And so the universe sort of conspired to show me how much more I actually had to learn. And that was when our youngest child, our son Fletcher, was diagnosed with autism a couple months before he turned 4. And I just really quickly realized that the parenting side of things is kind of just a whole different world compared to the professional side. And like a lot of parents, we kind of dove into learning all we could, getting connected with academic supports and therapeutic supports and all that, that kind of stuff. And really, for me, it felt important to connect with other parents. And so we started off, what eventually became Autism Outdoors Utah, started off as just parent support groups. We ran them at a local library in a room that you could rent out, and it was just sit in a circle and talk and that sort of thing. And I remember very clearly, I think I told Tara when I was going to run the first one, I was like, I don't know if anybody's going to show up, like we'll see if it's just me sitting there. But people did, and people were, really interested and engaged and that sort of thing. Um, and I should say too, starting these groups, there was very much just a need. This was in kind of the, close enough to things shutting down for COVID that a
Mhm.
lot of these sorts of groups hadn't really, come back. There wasn't a lot, especially in person. And kind of ironically, I was reading Uniquely Human as one of the books that came up in my algorithm, and this idea of like, oh, like there's whole thing of like parent retreats and parent support groups. And it was kind of like, well, if nothing's out there, maybe we should start it. And so then kind of fast forward again, and we about half a year or so into doing the support groups, Tara and I had the idea of like, we like the outdoors. Our son, like that's his happy and safe place. He's very, very regulated and loves just being outside. And we had this idea of like, what if we tried to get other families out doing these sorts of things that we would be doing anyway, going on hikes and paddleboarding and all that kind of stuff. And so our first ever outdoor event was a sledding trip. And again, kind of we were like, we'll see who shows up. And I think we had, I don't know what, like maybe 20 people or so who came out and braved the mountains and the snow in Utah. And that was kind of where things were born. We saw that there was this interest and this desire, and a lot of families told us, I've wanted to do stuff like this, but I've always been hesitant for fear of judgment or lack of kind
Mhm.
of a community to do it with. So
Mhm.
that kind of for me was, how we got to where we're at today.
Mhm.
Kind of reflecting on how you're describing this starts from a seed in a library and it becomes this blossoming, ecosystem, which is amazing. The um, it also must have been therapeutic for you as well. Like you create a community because you need a community, not because you want other people to have one.
Yeah, I can add
Absolutely.
to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my path end looks quite different from
Mhm.
Damon's. I am not a trained therapist, despite what I pretend to be with my friends. Um, my whole career is more healthcare technology marketing and healthcare specifically.
Oh,
So I came in with like an operator's brain, right? I'm a chief marketing officer. Like I know how to get stuff done.
Mhm. Mhm.
I have been practicing yoga for many years and teaching mindfulness. And so that's been a little bit more of the through line for me. But to your point, Dave, when Fletcher was diagnosed, yeah, Damon had the clinical instincts. He had the experience. He had kind of this breadth of clinical knowledge and experience. And I didn't have that.
Mhm.
And it did feel lonely, quite frankly. We were coming at it from kind of different places. And Damon saw that and thought other parents must feel the same way that I do.
Mhm.
And so creating that community was actually a part of me also getting to connect with other parents who are in a similar position to me, who are just trying to figure this out, who are learning as we go. Um, and then the outdoors piece of it. So the outdoors was already part of our family's regulation strategy, quite frankly. It's always been part of my regulation strategy. We ski, we hike, we do all sorts of things. And seeing Fletcher just on the water, like I remember having this
yeah.
profound moment that's just built into my brain where this kid is so calm and so regulated, and you can sense the peace coming off of him. And I wanted that for others. And like Damon shared, there didn't seem to be a lot of organizations doing this, and it's specifically for autistic people. So we created it.
Mhm.
Amazing. Amazing.
I think, and Tara, I don't know if you feel the same way. Like, I think I feel like far more socially connected after like navigating, kind of diagnosis and creating social connection in these ways. Like, I reflect back to like before Fletcher was born, or before he was diagnosed for sure. And I mean, we had friends and so forth, but like now it's like it feels more of like part of a community now than before, which is kind of ironic because like so often the narrative is around isolation and
Mhm.
families struggling in those ways.
Intentionally cultivating our community,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
think it's a big part of it. So there are people who uh, will not be included in activities that we're doing, just by virtue of them not fully accepting Fletcher as he is, who he is. And there's not a lot of those people in our lives, but there are some. But we've, yeah, intentionally fostered this community of people who have similar values to us around acceptance and love and tolerance and what we're looking for in one another as far as values. Even members of our Autism Outdoors Utah who have different religious views than us share that the religious organization they belong to doesn't always fully accept their child in their diagnosis, and so they've come to us specifically for that particular use case and scenario. So
Sure.
I think that's a big part of it.
Sure.
And I began to envision, or try to envision, what it was like at the very beginning when you began to speak to other families and what their reaction was. Of course, you can't generalize across every parent and every family, but I'm sure there were some people who were not sure, who were a little bit nervous. There were other people who probably felt like, oh my goodness, this is a place where I don't have to explain myself. And the other thing, Tara, that you said, I think was really important, that you were learning, and you still probably are learning as you go. So how does that work in terms of taking in the signals that you're reading from the parents? And then why don't you talk a little bit about kind of gaining traction and moving ahead and having families kind of find what they could find with what you're setting up?
Yeah, I think one thing that we and Damon and I have been really thoughtful and intentional about is creating spaces where people can feel seen and heard. And so we are always happy to like stay late at some sort of activity if it means just connecting and hearing people's stories. People love to share their stories with us. And they love to just listen to us share back. I think because David and I are in the position that we're in, us being vulnerable about what our journey has been makes it safe and okay for them to also feel like it's okay to be vulnerable and share their particular story. And in doing so, then we get additional ideas about things that we can do differently going forward, about different needs and sensory needs that are needed. We also encourage our members to create their own events or to volunteer with us as well. And that's part of what we consider to be lifting up other voices. A lot of our parents are autistic themselves. And so they have particular viewpoints. I think as far as growing the organization and, Damon, you've been just incredible in this regard. But it's also creating safe spaces on social media, which sounds a bit like an oxymoron nowadays.
Right. Yeah.
But Damon's done a really good job of bringing both humor along with like this sense of seriousness along with a safe space. And we've been really, really careful about making that a place where people can go. And again, like I started, feel seen and feel heard and be able to share their stories.
I would just add too, I think, especially kind of Barry, as you asked at the beginning, it was this interesting mix of, there was a lot of like, oh my gosh, like this is awesome, or we've been wanting something like people who are very excited, in like Utah is a pretty outdoorsy place. And so like a lot of people who are like, yeah, like we would love the idea of connecting with others and doing this. But then a pretty equal mix of, I think, a lot of uncertainty, whether that's about a particular activity, especially when we're doing stuff that is like water-based, like going on a river trip. Rightfully so, I think for a lot of families, that's like, ooh, like autism parents, we go to like worst case scenario to anticipate, right? And like there's often like, well, what if my kid jumps off the raft? What if my kid has a meltdown? Those sorts of things. But then I think also the like, what if I'm judged by others? What if there's a like, or what if there's not a good contingency plan if this doesn't go well, if this activity isn't the right fit for us? And so I think a lot of also, as Tara mentioned, kind of helping to create that safety is like letting people know, kind of like, hey, we don't have, this isn't like a big, like Red Bull sports, outdoor expedition or anything like that. This isn't a, competitive mountain biking. This is very, like we go outside and we do these activities because those are enjoyable and fun, but it's really about community and connection, and then we try to make things, accessible in that way, as well as accessible from like a neurodiversity standpoint.
In a sense, you could and I think a lot of people don't think of this specifically, but the parents are kind of taking a risk by kind of joining with you. Mm-hmm. And I mean, so many times over the years, parents have said to me, I'm really excited. I'm going to this support group. It's going to start next week. And then they come away saying it was awful. People were just venting and angry and just naturally expressing what they were experiencing. It's not that these are bad people, but it was something very different than what was expected. I think the fact that you're doing fun activities and outdoor activities, kind of puts that positive shift on what's going on. So, one thing I realized we didn't do is we didn't have you describe specifically the range of things that you do. You mentioned paddleboarding and you mentioned hiking, but why don't you just toss out kind of a sample of the things you do?
Yeah, we've, gosh, the list, let's see. So certainly things like hiking. So we do, kind of, in particular, like kind of family hiking trips where, parents with kids of all ages, that's the really cool thing is we get families with little kids, teenagers, even, adults, that will go with their family members and come and do hikes with us. We do in the summer, we do some river rafting trips. I would say those have probably been our biggest hit overall. I mean, we just opened up the registration for our August trip and we had almost 500 people register for our lottery drive, which is just mind blowing. And then, we have a couple of mountain lakes nearby where we'll have just kind of a lake day. We call it like a summer party or end of summer party where people come up and they paddleboard and they swim we had a whole comedy of errors last year where we rented a power boat, which we're not doing again. There's nothing that shows you how strong your marriage is, like trying to work together to back a boat onto a trailer. But we do, and then Tara does really cool kind of trauma-informed outdoor yoga classes, both for families. So we've done some, I'll let her talk about those, but some that are like kids and parents, and then also parent-specific yoga classes. We do a parent retreat, so very much kind of in line with the experiences we've had in the retreat with you all. Our first retreat was just a day-long option, and then this year we're doing a 3-day, 2-night down in the really cool little town in Utah called Moab, which is an outdoor mecca. Gosh, what else? I'll let Tara fill in the rest that I'm forgetting.
Yeah, so we still do have the support groups too, the parent support groups.
Oh, yeah.
And sledding. We're trying to incorporate more outdoor winter type activities. And then also just like play dates at the park. We call it Kids and Coffee right now, which is super subversive in Utah. I do adaptive yoga and it's trauma informed by default. All yoga I do is trauma informed by default.
Could you explain that for our listeners? I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with the term, but many may not be. Trauma informed.
Sure. Yeah. So a trauma informed yoga perspective, first of all, assumes body autonomy and assumes that this really is a journey for the person, for the student, for the yoga student. And so, for example, how this works out in practice is I start every single yoga class I teach with everything I'm about to say is just a suggestion. If it fits in your body and it's right for you, then try it on. If it doesn't, I'm happy to help adapt in any way. Or child's pose is always available to you. Sukhasana is always available to you. Tadasana is always available. And we create a safe return space for them to go to if the sensations start overwhelming. So it's really a intentional guided practice. When I do one-on-one trauma-informed yoga, we also get into various spaces in the body that carry different kinds of emotions, and we work on opening those up as it feels comfortable as well. So that's the short definition of what a trauma-informed yoga practice would look like.
Well, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I think too, like you've done a really good job of bringing especially with the kids and families that you'll do the classes with, bringing kind of like fun and joy into it. So like the Halloween themed class you did and some of those others that were like you think of yoga as this very serene kind of quiet discipline, which it can be, but also like bringing the fun element I thought was really cool too.
Yeah. And that's the adaptive part of the yoga that I do. And so in this perspective, I like to approach yoga and the mindfulness practice with this idea of this doesn't need to produce anything. So much of the work that autistic kids, families, grown-ups do has goals around it. Therapy has goals, your school has goals for you. And what I like to do instead is ask the question of like, what is this? What if there are no goals here? What if it doesn't need to produce anything? What if we can just be? And in that perspective, then like there is no correct pose. We just kind of adapt as we go. For example, I love to do farm animal sounds.
Yeah.
And even with the adults that I teach, I'll do cat cow pose and I'll just like get on the ground and moo my head off. And it makes the adults just like let go and relax and realize like,
Yes.
hey, there's no real right way to do this. Like, let's all have fun. And by the end of it, like everyone's kind of into their own body in an authentic way. And the other piece of this is it's subversively, I guess, teaching interoception, right? Like what's
Hmm.
going on in your own body. And that's something that we all need to work on, but autistic people in particular, it's an area of opportunity to grow. So, and it's controlled by them. So instead of being prompted to this, it's just naturally happening as part of the yoga practice.
It sounds like, in addition to creating a safe space where people are not feeling judged, you're also actually engaging in activities that allow them to go much deeper in that safe space. Tremendous opening up, I'm sure, for some parents, we've experienced in our years at the retreat, which could also be tricky because the
Yeah.
opening up, and I'm just curious if you want to comment on that, because it's so safe, parents may feel very, very overwhelmed and overcome by the torrent of emotions that they feel safe feeling in those settings.
Yeah. And this is where it's helpful, like one of the few situations that it's helpful to be married to a therapist. Um,
A few situations.
just
Yeah.
kidding. Damon, you can probably comment more on that, but
Yeah.
it's definitely a partnership in that regard.
I think, two things, absolutely, sometimes it's interesting, a lot of what we see is kind of like happy, excited, joyful, but, sometimes, especially in some of the support group settings, the parent retreat setting, we'll often, yeah, people carry a lot, and I think number one, just, to feel safe, heard, and validated. And I think especially like for me, the overlap of like, yeah, professional background and experience, but also like lived experience of like, even if I haven't experienced the exact same thing that another parent is bringing, like it definitely resonates with me and I can definitely understand and connect with on a level that feels, more than just like a professional level, and I think, and so I think that for a lot of parents, it's this sense of just like, oh my gosh, like this does. Sometimes we'll get people who are like, almost like apologizing for having, kind of these emotions, and it's like, no, like if not here, then where, right? Like if not in this community, in this intentional space, like people need these places. We weren't meant to do this alone.
I love that you said space,
Mm.
um, because it's not only, so bring it back to the outdoors. It's not only like the physical space, but it's also the temporal space. So, like, as for example, nothing outside is like rushing you. There's not a
Hmm.
bell about to ring. There's no godforsaken fluorescent lights. The sensory input is still really rich, but it's not like forcing you or asking you to do anything. Like that tree over there doesn't care what you're doing, if you're stimming, whatever. Um, and so there's more room to move, there's more room to pace. And there we cultivate this community and these people that it doesn't have to mean anything socially being in the outdoors. There's just all this open space in order to do things. And sometimes that does bring up feelings, but it brings it up in a safe space that also is reflective of the environment. Um, so yeah, I think just building on the word space a little bit.
Do the lack of parameters and structure in terms of your time and schedule, does that work against individuals out in nature? Meaning, for me, it's very nice to not be. I hate that a meeting starts at 10 a.m. That's so arbitrary. Why not start the meeting when I'm ready to start the meeting? But that's not the industrialized world, right? But when I'm out camping, oh, well, I guess I've got the next 4 hours to just whatever, and I whatever around. And the first day of camping is always tricky for me. And by the second day, I've relaxed into the pace. Does that kind of work sometimes against individuals or families who are like, I don't know what to tell you the schedule is because we're outdoors today. There is no schedule.
I think what we try to do, especially like intentional planning of activities, is having kind of enough structure where it doesn't feel
Mm.
so right. Like things that are too open-ended for many people can be anxiety producing. You know, I think
Hmm.
a lot of our parents and the kids who come, you know, want to know, you know, kind of the basics of like, yeah, like what can I expect as far as like the bones of the schedule? And so provide I think of it like providing the parameters, kind of the guardrails, but within that framework, there's a lot of flexibility is what that can in terms of what that can look like. You know,
That's perfect.
if we're doing a hike to a waterfall, yeah, like the goal is to start at say 10 a.m. and to get there maybe by lunchtime. But if we get halfway and that's where we turn around, that's fine. If it takes us a
Hmm.
little bit longer, as long as that's cool with everyone's, you know, the rest of their day, like that's fine. If we need to, you know, take a break or go off on a side trail or whatever, like this idea of enough guidance and enough structure, but also enough flexibility where people don't feel like it's kind of like too locked in is really, I think, what we strive for.
Hmm.
Yep.
You know, going back to the sense of community, I'm a visual thinker, so I'm visualizing also siblings coming along who may not be on the spectrum or who may not be neurodivergent at all. And I'm curious about families maybe who've not had much experience in having fun times with other families
Yeah.
who have a child on the spectrum, where it's not, you know, a school assembly or it's something that's structured, you know, kind of in the everyday kind of activity. So what do you see happening with that? Especially one other thing that you know happens at our retreat is once people get comfortable with each other, the mentoring that goes on. That one family sees that, oh, well, you have a child who's 3 years older than my child. What was it like navigating the transition to? And, you know, maybe they don't talk about that at all.
Yeah. Well, I think this is one where kind of starting with our own experience, you know, so we have a daughter as well. She's older than Fletcher. So she's 9 and is not autistic. But it does have some ADHD kind of neurodivergence going on. Um, and I think she'd be okay if I shared that.
She's very
Um,
proud of it. AC
that's
is
true.
proud of her ADHD. Yep.
But I think we see it kind of starting like more immediately with her where like it's this really cool experience for her of I think being around the mix, right? Of you know other kids that are sort of like her brother and then other kids that are not neurodiverse. And I think what's really cool to see with her is like how well she connects with both.
Hmm.
You know, there's some and she man, she does you talk about like learned skill set, like being ahead of the curve as far as like inclusion and acceptance and awareness. I'm like, man, she is like these lessons that she is learning like, you know, decades before any of, you know, either Tara or I did. Um, but yeah, like we very much encourage, you know, I'll sometimes get parents who ask like, oh, we want to go on the rafting trip, for example. Can we bring siblings? And we're like, yes, like this is a whole family trip. This isn't
Hmm.
just, you know, one parent and their autistic child or children. And I think that's really kind of it's a really cool thing to see. You know, everyone having this shared experience where they can, you know, where they can be there and connect in this way, and where, you know, siblings from different families are connecting with one another. The other thing too, we didn't mention this in terms of our list of things that we offer. About a year ago, I actually got trained to facilitate SIB shops, which is a kind of a curriculum around running
Hmm.
support groups for siblings, not just around siblings of autistic individuals, but kind of disability or medical conditions more generally.
Yep.
And that's one of our kind of growth areas. We haven't really been able to, just from the sake of time, we haven't had the opportunity to really dive into that. But that's an area where we're really hoping to expand is doing these sort of nature-based SIB shops where SIBs can come and have these experiences where they connect with one another and that sort of thing.
And a great context to do that in as well,
Yeah,
out in
yeah,
nature. Yeah, and I think that's something that, you know, I know many of our listeners are very familiar with, and that is sometimes the so-called typical SIB is left out of the equation.
yeah.
Um, and many adult typical SIBs talk about how they felt that, you know, that they were low rung on the ladder because of the needs of another child or the children.
That's
But
what I was going to add
Mhm.
was the outdoors environment. So our activities, especially let's take the rafting one, for example. Um, yes, it's an autism oriented activity. There will be families that have kids on the spectrum there. There will be neurotypical kids there. Everyone's going rafting. That's the focus. The
Mhm.
focus is we're just all on the river. We're the same. And the focus isn't on the neurodiversity or on the autistic kid. It's just an environment we've set up so that everybody can share the same space in a way where nobody's explaining themselves and a meltdown isn't going to end everything. And there's people around to help support that journey. So that's one of the things that I really love about the outdoors, is that it's kind of evening that out between the siblings and giving equal weight.
Hmm. And you're achieving the goals of inclusion not in an artificial environment or somewhat artificial like a classroom. It's just the
Mhm.
kids out there doing what kids do out there together. It's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, could you talk a little bit more about the regulation piece? Because, that has become such a huge, huge focus, not just in autism, but I think for all human beings right now. And how much other parents kind of tap into that or notice that, or where that becomes much more of a priority for them and their family, as opposed to not necessarily being that.
I'll share a story, and then Damon, I know you have a good perspective on like what is happening with that regulation in nature.
Mm.
But the story, man, I'm going to get emotional talking about it. Our last rafting trip, there was a boy who was about 9, and it was just him and his mom, and he was minimally verbal. And he sat next to his mom on this rafting trip for the first 15-20 minutes, just in a little ball, a tiny little ball right behind his mom.
Mm.
And I would kind of like touch base with them every once in a while and kind of see how they were doing. And it was kind of just the same, like, oh, he's scared and that kind of a thing. My daughter was also in the boat. And then there were three other kids, one of them neurodiverse. And those 2 other kids were just kind of like going nuts, right? Even my daughter, like they were doing all sorts of physical activities and doing all sorts of things on the boat. And I turned around, and this little boy had kind of opened up a little bit, and he was starting to like not sit quite so close to his mom.
Mm.
And he was starting to sit up a little bit. And then we started playing in the front of the boat with like the different birds and can we put our hands in the water? And he kind of started to move up toward the front of the boat. And then I turn around and he's like touching me.
Mm.
And I said something to him, and he just kind of looked at me and didn't say anything yet. And so I kind of gave him a little bit of space and time. By the end of this rafting trip, he was using all of the verbal language that he had. He was paddling the boat at one point. He had
Yeah.
completely opened up.
Mm.
And it was just this, I get chills. It was this magical thing to have happen. And the mom was just beaming by the end of the trip. She said, we never would have done this. I have never seen this happen with him before. I am so proud of him. Thank you so much for giving this space. And it was just magical to watch happen it was just over an hour.
Mm.
Amazing.
So you're helping not just parents, but family members see their autistic family member in a very different way.
Yep. You get to, as a parent, I will say the best I've ever felt in my life is when I see my kids shine. And I'm one of the most self-centered people that I know. and even I recognize this. It's just it's the best feeling ever. And what you're doing is creating environments, opportunities that are accessible. They are accessible. These are not like $50,000 corporate, backed retreats for the elite. These are family experiences, accessible in nature, and that that's a very transformative experience.
Mm.
Well, and I think one of the really cool things, I was actually just about a week ago, I did a nature-informed therapy training through an organization called Center for CNIT, Center for Nature Informed Therapy. They're out in Maryland. And
Mm.
and what's really cool is that there's, these things that we've known for generations, right? Like there's now kind of this research that backs it up, like and for some people it doesn't matter. They're like, I don't care. Like I just want to get outside, right? But for some people, there's this element of like understanding, yeah, like why is it, at least for many people, kind of, especially in the autism realm, like why is it that for many autistic people, it does feel regulating. It does feel kind of like what Tara described. And I think it's really cool kind of having that perspective too of like kind of the brain science behind it.
Hmm.
And we see that. Yeah. I mean, we observe how like if you compare, being on a rafting trip or a trail or whatever to say like a more traditional setting like a classroom, and you think of like the sensory experience and the social experience and even just like opportunities for autonomy, just
Hmm.
how not only how different it is, but how much all of that is just built into the experience as opposed to, it's funny, like in school settings, like our son just finished kindergarten and they did a pretty decent job of having like sensory supports and that sort of thing, but it's all stuff that they have to build into this classroom. Whereas
Hmm.
out in nature, the things that are, regulating and these opportunities for social connection, for autonomous choice, like these are all just built in,
Hmm.
and I think that's really kind of, I don't know. And we always make it clear, like, because, I always think like we don't want to overstate. Like, yeah, there's some autistic people where they're like, no, like outdoors is not my jam. Like, I don't
Hmm.
like the bugs, I don't like the wind. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't, it's not this kind of like snake oil cure all, like everyone will benefit, but more the idea of like for a lot of people, it really does, we see this play out kind of, just how it regulates, how it helps people in all these ways.
And I think creating the safe space to try it out as
Hmm.
Yeah.
well. I think
Yeah.
by default, a lot of parents generally, regardless of neurodiverse status of their kids, are kind of scared of the outdoors. Like it can be unpredictable. Like that
Yep.
river's going really fast. There's hiking and like there's a snake or whatever. Like there's all sorts of things that pop into our head. And our goal is maybe you feel like it's not right for you, and that's okay. But we're going to create a safe space for you to try it out and try it
Hmm.
on.
Mhm.
And part of that creating that safe space also includes part of Damon, you talk a lot about this, the dignity of risk as well.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Creating spaces for these kiddos to, yeah, maybe my son, he ran into the river, the fast moving river last time we were there. And my Fitbit has like a little spike in it on my heart rate, like right when he went in.
Oh, oh, good.
I'll bet.
But we're gonna
Uh,
take it back. Like that's
Mhm.
he's learning. He's
Hmm.
learning what that river means, and he's learning that mama will freak out if I go too far, right? Um, and that's what we're trying to do here as well. So instead of coming at it from a default view of this is scary, we're saying we're going to create a safe space and let's let our kids try it on.
Hmm.
Yeah,
You know,
I think creating the broad safety parameters, like, things that fall outside that, obviously that's where we have to like really ensure safety. But within those broad parameters, like there's a lot of latitude as far as what is okay, And I
mhm.
think that that's something that kids don't, not just kids, I mean, kids or, teens or adults or whomever, I think that's something we often don't have. We've sort of gotten away from like the inherent connection we had to the natural world for so
Mhm.
long.
In everyday life, especially in schools and in structured activities, so many boundaries that we create are social boundaries. And sometimes those social boundaries just have to do with our society's rules. Out in nature, there's a lot of safety boundaries as
Mhm.
well that kids have to learn about. And, when you said earlier, well, why is nature, so regulating for so many people on the spectrum and for all of us? If you think about it, you know, the shared attention piece, we're so often trying to get kids we're trying to grab their brains and have their brains focus on what our brains are focused on. And the wonderful thing about being in nature is, oh, there's a bird.
Mhm.
Oh, okay, it's getting a little rocky, so to be safe, I need to step gingerly here. Or where you are in control, the autonomous piece. You're in control of your selective attention, and there's so many wonderful things to attend to.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of physical stimulations that are vastly different from the comforts of being indoors.
Mhm.
Prickly grass, weird bumpy terrain that makes your ankles move in and out. You don't realize it, but you're exhausted by the end of the hike. And it's things that you don't even think about until you're a child. So I think going into it knowing that this is there's a lot of factors here that are going to bombard our child, and one of them is the sensory.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why, by the
And
way,
if
that's why
you're
anything in the water is awesome because
Oh,
it's so stabilizing.
I mean, and again, this is like kind of this inherent wisdom overlapped with brain science, where it's like, okay, so like being on a paddleboard, kind of balance and proprioception. You've got interoception going on. You've got, the tactile, the water, the sound of the waves. I mean, like it's, people, you think of like how much money do we spend buying, like noise machines to make wave sounds, right? Like,
You
but
can
yeah,
listen to waves.
right. Yeah. No, I agree. I think water, of all the settings we do things in, I think water is the one most consistently where there's just such cool experiences that we see people have. Absolutely.
I could see that. I once long ago I did sort of a introductory mountain biking camp for kids, and my own daughter was sort of my pilot like test subject, and it was fantastic. We just mountain biking is another one that I feel like, and since you mentioned Moab earlier,
Oh, yeah.
if you ever need some random adult to join you in Moab for free,
Yeah.
I'm your guy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
For a
Absolutely.
mountain biking trip.
And I can attest to the fact that Dave is quite random. So it's okay. So I'm sure there are some listeners who are saying this sounds wonderful, and I want to do something like this, and maybe you can give some little bits of advice on both sides on kind of the things to be aware of that may be challenging, or you have to really understand what you're getting into, as opposed to the joys and some of the strategies to begin to build even a piece of what you're offering.
Yeah, I think one thing that from the get-go that we really just have tried to be mindful of is this concept of kind of low barrier to entry. I was on a rafting trip once with a guy who's an outdoor-based therapist, and we were talking about different outdoor therapy settings and how there are these kind of more high adventure, climbing a peak or whatever it might be, really intense whitewater trip. And I really connected with this idea that he talked about, this idea that like, really the best options are ones that the most people can go do, so it's not necessarily these crazy, I mean, these are things that I might do, that Tara and I might do on our own, but like with our, when we're doing these things with our organization, it's really about what sort of activities. The goal is getting people outside. The goal is getting people outside and connected and having experiences as a community. And so really starting with that as the framework, rather than maybe latching on to a particular activity or the idea that it needs to look a particular way. I think that's a big piece. And then thinking of things like, yeah, is this something that, the average person who maybe doesn't have a ton of outdoor experience or comfort, or that they might be nervous, is this going to feel okay enough, right? Like within their, kind of enough standard deviations within their comfort zone that they're not going to, have a traumatic experience and that sort of thing.
I would add to not over-index on perfection.
Mm-hmm.
So when we started, we literally started with like sledding and hoping somebody showed up, like Damon said. Like we just put it out there. And we, in the beginning, did have times when nobody showed up, but we kept going because we believed in the importance of what we were doing and we saw the effect it could have. If you wait until you have like nonprofit insurance or nonprofit generally set up or the perfect venue or the volunteer roster, like you just won't start. And so there's a little bit, and this is probably a growing opportunity for a lot of us, but there's a little bit of getting comfortable with the uncertainty of knowing what this is going to look like and how it's going to work out. And on that same note, and this gets into a little bit of what we talked about earlier with the agenda, but like have a plan, have a backup plan, but don't be attached to either one. And
Yes.
then success is defined on its own terms.
Yes.
I think also bring snacks.
Bring snacks. Yeah.
Food is always the great equalizer. So
I'll tell you what.
invest in your snack profile, and you will, you'll get, people will show up and be happy generally if there's good snacks.
Especially dark chocolate. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, guys, thank you so much. This is wonderful. I want to come out and be with you.
We've got spots open,
I will keep away from the river rafting. vestibular neurological system would raise a big red flag for that. No, but
Barry's underselling himself. So you all know him as this rough, tumble, scrappy kid from Brooklyn. However, when I met Barry, he was a grizzled outdoorsman on the wild frontier in Banff and living in a stick hut. And I brought him back to civilization, and here we are doing a podcast. He's as rugged as it gets.
yeah,
He's Jeremiah Johnson, you know.
that's the Barry I never knew.
That dates all of us.
So continued good luck with Utah Autism Outdoors, and I'm sure so many of our listeners are, if not trying to kind of embrace so much of what you're doing, they're taking away pieces of that, and it's just another way for families to connect and for kids to just experience life in a way that's invigorating, joyful, and connecting. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And we're always happy to connect with anyone wherever you are in the country. You don't need to be in Utah. So they can find us on our website, Utah Autism Outdoors, our Facebook group, Autism Outdoors Utah, and just reach out. We're happy to create connections and learn from others.
Terrific. Great. Bye-bye.
Awesome.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks.